I've sent a few people down to the college to talk to you about it. Expect them at your door around 12.
We're going live.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good morning again. It's Friday, March 26, 10:36 a.m. This is the second half of the morning session for Senate Natural Resources and Energy. We're continuing with a discussion of community scale renewable energy development in the state. And next up on our list of witnesses is Melissa Bailey. Good morning, Ms. Bailey. And just for the 4 witnesses still on our list, we have about 40 minutes. So I'll just ask people to pace themselves, aiming for roughly 10 minutes or so. I'm sorry that we're getting a little squeezed, but I know you're all experienced presenters, so you'll all take it in stride. And with that, Ms. Bailey, good morning. Thanks again.
Hi, good morning. Melissa Bailey with Vermont Public Power Supply Authority. I do have some slides to share, and I think I have about a dozen slides. I will move as quickly as possible through these today. So,
and also by way of reassurance, so we're really opening up a new topic of discussion, and we'll be coming back to it. So,
apologies, I'm just trying to find the correct document here.
I know that feeling.
It's on the website too. You can access it from there, if that helps.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Oh.
It's okay. No worries.
Yeah, don't worry, but you can get it from the website.
Are you seeing that screen now?
No.
Not yet.
All right.
I see it coming down the wire.
If you'd prefer, we can always, oh, there we go.
Here we come.
Sorry.
No worries.
For time, and I slowed us down even more. We probably wasted a minute. All right, I will go quickly. Just in testimony today, I plan to talk a little bit about some renewable energy projects that BEPS is engaged with, offer some general comments on S119, and then provide some responses to the questions posed by the committee in preparation for testimony today. So,
perfect. Thank you.
Again, VEPSA represents 11 municipal utilities geographically dispersed around Vermont and representing serving roughly 30,000 customers in the state. Some characteristics of Vermont's municipal utilities: as public power entities, we operate with a high degree of transparency. Our financial books are open, and there is no motive for profit built into our decision making. We operate with a high level of responsiveness to the public. And I do think it's worth noting that when a municipal utility develops a solar project, that is essentially a community energy project. The project decision-making is led by the community, and all of the benefits flow directly to the community members that are the utility owners. Projects that we are currently, that have recently, will be commissioned either recently or in the near future, are located in Northfield, Morrisville, and Hardwick. Those are utility-owned projects. Those are PPA projects, so utility-directed projects, and those are developed in partnership with local developers. And you'll see the range of sizes here on this slide. 1 to 2 megawatts seems to be an appropriate size for many of our members in terms of achieving economies of scale and also finding an appropriate size that fits within the utility, the municipality. We also are engaged in a partnership with Pecos Wind, a technology outside of solar for small scale wind generators. And this will, we're pursuing a community energy model here. It's at rates price competitive with solar, and the intent is to develop a model where customers can buy into the output from those generators. I'm going to spend a quick moment presenting the context of the existing policy framework that guides our decision making. Of course, as the committee knows, the Renewable Energy Standard dictates the amount of renewable energy sold to Vermont consumers. As a subset to the RES, we have Tier 2, which dictates the amount of new renewable small-scale generation that will be developed in Vermont over the coming decade. I think it is worth noting that Tier 2 does not represent the whole of in-state renewable generation. And I think that's an important distinction that we need to remember. There are other in-state resources that are not qualified as Tier 2. So we do need to be careful with our terminology when we talk about 10% of retail sales in Vermont will come from Tier 2 resources. There are other renewable resources in Vermont that are providing power to Vermont customers that exceed that 10%. And just to note that least cost integrated resource planning is what underpins all utility decision making. This is guided or required under Section 218C. And it necessitates that utilities always look at costs with benefits. And, we've heard a lot about benefits today in today's testimony, and it's an inconvenient reality that we also need to look at costs when we do our planning, and that's incumbent on the utilities to take that approach. So again, distribution utilities are statutorily bound to meet our renewable requirements at least cost to ratepayers. That includes the environmental benefits again. So we're not just talking about low cost fossil fuel power, we're talking about least cost holistically. And VEPS's decision making here, low cost, reliable, renewable resources is kind of what guides our decision making. And it is important to note that these are statutory obligations placed on regulated electric utilities. This does not apply to developers or the for-profit sector. And we only deviate from these principles when there's a statutory obligation to do so. And of course, that's up to the discretion of the legislature when there's another policy goal that needs to trump this, this existing framework. And I just highlight this because in our view, the existing regulatory framework works pretty well at protecting ratepayers and providing value to customers in excess of costs. I think to Senator McDonald's question earlier about what's holding us back. Again, costs are inconvenient and they do need to be acknowledged. We have the technology today to put solar panels on every house, a battery in every basement, and an electric vehicle and charger in every driveway. That's not a technological challenge. That is a cost challenge. And again, it's a question of how much will it cost and who bears those costs. And so that's at the forefront of VEPS's thinking on these issues. So I did frame some of these responses to the questions that we received in advance of this morning's testimony. The challenges that the municipal utilities have identified primarily, there is a concern that overly prescriptive mandates drive costs up to ratepayers. The concern there has been borne out in our experience that when the rates that are paid to specific technologies are mandated either in statute or through a regulatory process, that tends to result in costs in excess of the value delivered to ratepayers. And a secondary concern is that there has been an excessive focus on the electric sector without a commensurate focus on the other two energy sectors that are both higher cost and culprits in the majority of our carbon emissions. So the perspective of VEPSA and our members is that the state's goals and requirements are met most efficiently when utilities are afforded some level of flexibility to negotiate on behalf of ratepayers. So, another question was, how cost effectively are we meeting our Tier 2 obligations? We would posit that the utilities are meeting Tier 2 cost effectively. I've listed here what the average cost of compliance for Tier 2 in 2019 was, $39 a megawatt hour. The alternative compliance for that year payment would have been $62 a megawatt hour. So that's what the legislature dictated as a maximum cost for Tier 2 compliance. And as you can see, the utilities have come in well below that cost. And the biggest obstacle to meeting Tier 2 more cost effectively would be the price of net metering, because the rates paid under the net metering program are significantly higher than the rates paid for other resources that deliver the same benefits. And then an illustrative example, I mentioned that that prescriptive policies have been a challenge in terms of imposing excess costs on ratepayers. The standard offer, I think that bears out well in the standard offer program. We started that program seeing prices around 30 cents a kilowatt hour, which is quite expensive, and those contracts are still in place today. And when the legislature made the change to a competitive bidding mechanism between 2012 and 2013, prices dropped 50%. So we were getting the same technologies, the same procurement at 50% lower costs. So the regulatory process to set the prices arrived at a price of 25.7 cents a kilowatt hour, and developers went above and beyond and came in with bids that costs, in some instances, almost half of that. So this, we point this out to show that state set prices sometimes are not actually reflective of market conditions and are not going to deliver the best value to customers. And developers will be responsive to policy changes. Again, the standard offer previously offered a set price, regardless of the cost to actually construct the project. And when we were able to leverage market competition, ratepayers benefited. This is a cost comparison. This is most likely similar to the data that Vermont Electric Co-op showed a few moments ago, showing the cost comparison of renewable resources that Vermont has procured. Again, the standard offer since its inception, I think in 2011, comes in at an average price of 21 cents a kilowatt hour. You'll see the current net metering rates. Of course, past net metering rates are higher than those. These are the 2021 rates. And then the current standard offer rates, which are similar to the rates that utilities are able to enter into PPAs for. 9 cents a kilowatt hour is what we're able to procure in-state small solar for currently. And that's pretty in line with the financial value delivered to the utility and to the ratepayers. Again, these resources all provide the same benefits. The benefits part of the equation is the same, and the different is the cost. At the bottom there, the cost of energy for 2021, this would be market energy, not specifically renewables. And we just put that in there in the context of S119, which starts with a base rate at the avoided cost for the utility. So that's a proxy for what that would be. That would be essentially the base rate contemplated under S119. And from there, you would be potentially applying those adders. So for example, a REC adder, a renewable energy credit adder, could most reasonably be estimated at around 3 cents a kilowatt hour, which brings you right up to the 9 cents at which we're procuring resources currently. And then any adders above and beyond that for commercial and industrial customers or nonprofits as contemplated in the bill language would be above and beyond that.
Can you explain that term 5 by 16, please?
Sure. 5 by 16 is what our power supply folks thought would be most appropriate for essentially when solar delivers power. That's 5 days a week during essentially the daytime hours, peak hours. Those are the hours of the day. You could also have 7 by 24, which would be around the clock power.
Okay, thank you. I just hadn't seen that terminology before. Thank you.
Yeah, that's because that came out of our power supply division. Thank you for the question.
Mr. Chair,
Senator McDowell.
just the witness is correct when she talks about 30 cents for standard offer. And what we are, the witness we had before we took a break was talking about how do we get the sun to shine at night. And is the witness critical of having had the 30-cent standard power and that was a mistake and we shouldn't have done that? Or is the witness saying, thank goodness we had that standard offer of 30 cents because it led to it was the beginning of a march towards cutting peak demand and et cetera, et cetera. So what?
Yep, sure. Thanks for the question. I think to respond I think where you're going is in a nascent technology, it may be necessary or appropriate to offer subsidies. And we need to be cognizant and mindful of as an industry matures, those subsidies are no longer necessary and result in excessive costs.
But the witness isn't saying that the subsidy, which is was 30 cents, which is no longer in place, wasn't necessary.
I would
When-
agree. I would
Okay.
agree. It may have
But
been
when
necessary.
when we try to talk to the public and our colleagues, we constantly get that tossed at us. And we are arguing, we are debating what goes on today and what should go on tomorrow. And is the question, Mr. Chair, or not, or did I come back at the wrong time? How do we get the sun to shine at night? Is that what we're discussing?
Well, it's a pretty open discussion today about S119 was just the construct to get the ball rolling. And then the email I sent out to all our witnesses today said, how do you define the renewable energy challenge for the state and how might you approach it? So we're hearing quite a few different things. They're all complementary, but I think, and some of them, a lot of overlap.
Yeah, I would like to argue for a week about how come those of us who got net metering and were, told we were going to get, certain benefits are watching those get peeled away and we're being screwed by it. That's not what we should be talking about. We can spend all our time on that. Other states are trying to answer the question, how do we get the sun to shine at night? And they're ahead of us. So how do we answer that question? Or are we going to continue to debate how we've treated people in the past? Are we going to move along to how we treat people, how we get the sun to shine at night, and listen to the folks who work in this industry and deal with the math, give us some suggestions, or at least articulate some questions we need to answer to achieve that goal.
I think that's where
And no one is
yeah.
knows her business better than Melissa Bailey, who could ask us those questions.
So,
Well, and I would just say that part of what people have been doing, I don't know that it's sort of just I did ask about past programs because I think the context of how we got to our current situation is just a helpful benchmark. It has nothing to do with sort of blame or was it a good idea, bad idea, so much as where are we now? And, it's a context defining thing.
Great. So
And
where do we go and then
Yes.
argue about the other stuff, the grievances later? Where do we go tomorrow?
right. So Senator Westman, you have your hand up.
it's a slightly different way to focus it than what Senator McDowell said. But we have whole grid constraints, particularly in the northwest part of the state in the Shia, which is now constraining our energy projects, our renewable energy projects, and constraining what we've already got built. And it's the same. I personally think part of the way out is storage, which is the same issue that he's talking about, getting the sun to shine at night. And my question is there anything we can do specifically that will help us out of that kind of a box? And so it's a little different way, nuance of what it is, but it very much is in the same ballpark as what Senator McDowell is asking.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, couldn't agree more. If we're going to answer the question of how do we get the sun to shine at night, there are places where it's easier to create that and places where there are disadvantages, like the Shia area. But let's move ahead in answering how do you get to shine at night at the same time that you are making the helping to make the Shia area more competitive rather than, or more user-friendly rather than less user-friendly at the same time.
Yeah, yeah, in a whole region of the state, we already have renewable energy projects that if we could figure out how to master that, and I would say if there was a plan to build more power lines, I'd want to put that second to seeing if we could create more storage that would allow us to better use what we already have.
Yep.
And is there something that we can do to be helpful in that?
So I think there were a lot of questions in there. I will briefly touch on storage. I think in terms of policies, again, I agree with Senator Bray, it's not about laying blame. And I do think it's important to learn lessons from the policies that we've had, and seeing that a policy that mandated a set price for solar has resulted in paying twice as much as was needed in a given year for that technology. And we would want to avoid that with any storage related policies that might be implemented in the future. We would strongly discourage set rates by the state for procuring storage. Senator Russman does, bring up the SHII concerns, and that those are partly resultant of policies that encouraged solar through extremely generous financial incentives, irregardless of siting. So those policies, net metering and standard offer, did not direct solar to be developed in the places that it was beneficial to the grid. They directed solar to be developed where land was cheap. And those policies are essentially still on the books. I believe that there was a proposal to the PUC to apply a grid adjuster under standard offer, and the PUC declined. I'm not sure that they felt they had the legislative authority to do that under the constructs of the standard offer program. So currently those programs, there's no different compensation depending on where your project is located, even though the benefits are largely variable depending on where the project is located. And to Senator Russman's other point about adding storage, we absolutely think storage is a necessary part of the future, a necessary part of our distribution systems future. And VEPSA's perspective is that in the interim, while the costs of storage are coming down, we should certainly utilize the capacity on the grid that we have. And Belco definitely encouraged the committee to hear from Belco on their long-range transmission plan. We recently reviewed a draft, and my takeaway is there is capacity on the system to absorb more renewable generation, more solar generation, and we should use that capacity before we make investments in freeing up additional capacity in the northern portion of the state. That's the least cost solution, essentially. If we want more renewables, put them where we have space, and then invest in the technologies that will add capacity in other regions.
I have a quick question. Ms. Bailey, can you remind me and maybe the committee as well of the length of the commitments under standard offer? Are they typically 20 years?
I think the solar contracts are 25 years.
25, right. So although we're not building those at those rates anymore, we're still living with the implications of those in earlier investments. So I don't want to overstate the importance, but we do have a legacy that we'll be paying for, for a period of time. So,
Mr. Chair,
please.
The witness is correct, and you are correct. It is only a legacy that we will be paying for, and which sounds like we're trying to make fix something or correct something. If we were to just never have done this in the first place, we would be so much worse off than we are today. The legacy that was not perfect in today was a huge part of why electricity costs for Vermonters less today than it used to. We've tackled peak demand, and it has been savings, and now the peak demand is after dark, and we're arguing over we have more electricity than peak demand needs. How do we deal with after dark? That's our question, and not take the lessons that we've learned. Mr. Chair, the first year of standard offer at 30 cents was put out there, and the solution was to select people to build by lottery. There was no analysis. There was we were shocked at how many people were eager to get into the solar business. And in the second, and after the 2-year process, it came up again, and the proposal from the administration was to continue the lottery. And the committee that you chair stopped that in its tracks and said, no more lottery. It will be directed to the places where it is most cost effective. And we've already learned some lessons, and we're correcting them as we go. But that's what this committee does. How does this committee lead in making the sun shine at night is our current task, and what are the questions we need to answer? And Ms. Bailey just gave us about 3 questions in a row faster than I could write them all down. And they're the key to unlocking this. So, and her 3 suggestions were not about what had happened in the past, but why didn't the PUC make some rules that seemed to make sense? And the PUC's, it might have been because the PUC didn't have the authority. Was that your testimony, Ms. Bailey?
Yes, and we'd have to dig out that order where they declined to adopt that. But
Can we write
that's my
that down and say we have to answer that? That's one of our goals. Okay, and then correct it if it needs correction.
So I'm going to agree with everything I've heard. So
Okay, so thank you, Senator Westman, for pointing us in this direction. Thank you.
Senator Westman, you had your hand up. Are you?
I was just going to say, it's nice to know what the past is, but we are where we are, and
Yes.
it's time to move ahead. And if I've got, a whole region of the state that is, we're constrained now, and we have projects already built, the question for me is, how do I get the power out of there?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to interrupt one more time because it is, this has been a great discussion, and I hate ever to be cutting anyone off. And so what I'm going to suggest, I'm going to check in with our remaining witnesses, Mr. Farrell, Mr. Bender, and Mr. Edgerly Walsh, and ask if we can reschedule for another time, because I think there's obviously a lot of committee interest. You're excellent witnesses with a lot of knowledge. I apologize that the committee is deeply interested in this, as everyone can see. So rather than rush anything, I would like to apologize on behalf of my overly ambitious scheduling, and then
It's your
invite
committee
you to
members,
come.
Mr. Chair.
Well, invite you to come back. Honestly, it's as a chair, one of the worst things to me that ever happens is we have witnesses in and no one has any questions. There's no discussion. It's great to have people really engaged in the topic. We're at a inflection point on a lot of these things. And so let's slow down enough so that we'll get to hear the testimony. So let's finish with Ms. Bailey, and then Senator Parent has arrived because he has an amendment on the floor for S101, and we need to hear that before we go to the floor. So again, thank you to the witnesses we won't get to, and my apologies one more time. Ms. Bailey, we're back to you.
Okay, thanks. And I will try to be mindful of time again. I do want to touch on this issue of energy equity and energy burden because it is a key concern for the VEPS municipals. And there is a concern that to date, the financial benefits of renewable development in Vermont have largely gone to higher income communities, and getting participation by lower income customers is a critical component. And in order to avoid cost shifting, we do think that the public funding in order to subsidize this participation is necessary and appropriate. We were pleased that the governor proposed spending $9 million specifically on low income participation in renewable projects. We would caution against, again, raising, putting those burdens on electric ratepayers as a whole does have drawbacks, and that needs to be called out. Whenever you choose one group within ratepayers to benefit, of course, those costs are shifted onto others. It's a closed loop, essentially. So somebody can benefit, and then someone else must bear those costs. So again, we think public funding is appropriate and necessary. in order to ensure access to all customers. And again, just a quick note that we think energy burden must be looked at across energy sectors. When we engage with our communities and in partnership with Efficiency Vermont around energy and energy issues, transportation and thermal come up as the key concerns for households. So we do just want to avoid focusing exclusively on the electric sector. To the question around whether the key consideration is sustaining a specific workforce or a specific sector of the economy, we would offer a resounding no, that's not really the responsibility of electric ratepayers, and that rather than focusing on keeping a headcount within a specific sector, a specific job sector, we really need to be focused on the well-being of Vermont households and businesses overall, largely.
Right.
So
And that question came out because I serve on finance and we've been going through the Rygate discussions, really. Thank you.
Sure. I mean, not to discount the jobs benefits of any renewable generation project. And we think those need to be looked at holistically. And that we need to be mindful of rate pressure in the electric sector, which I'm sure the committee has heard me say multiple times. But raising costs in the electric sector will not serve to meet our climate goals overall. And essentially, we see it as businesses' role to adapt to public needs, not the public's role to, not the converse of having the public adapt to business needs. Around who should own new assets, utilities in our least cost planning, we evaluate all ownership structures, PPAs, owning the projects ourselves. We look to deliver the most benefit to ratepayers and minimize risk to ratepayers. Most recently, our solar projects have been done through PPAs, planned purchase agreements. And we are procuring additional renewable generation, again, in line with the tier 2 requirements. Another question that was posed that we're going to go ahead and take a stab at answering, what opportunities are there for developers to lead? We would take issue with that premise. We don't see it as in ratepayers' best interest for unregulated for-profit entities to lead on renewable development. Utilities have been assigned the statutory requirement to provide the most value to ratepayers at least cost, and we don't see it as appropriate. This is not in any way to disparage developers. It's just that's not what they were set up to do. Utilities were set up to deliver reliable, affordable, renewable electricity to Vermonters at least cost, and that's what we are doing. In terms of where developers can participate, we have the net metering program, we have the standard offer program, we have 4.100, which is Vermont's implementation of PURPA, and we are voluntarily engaged with utilities, with developers in negotiating contracts outside of any state program as well. So I think there's room for everybody to take a role in increasing our renewable generation and managing, grid impacts, but putting developers in the lead would not be appropriate. And a quick note on scale, just because we did, review the S119 bill language, diversity of scale is desirable. 5 megawatts allows for economies of scale for a renewable project. It's also, you saw the picture of one of Vermont Electric Co-op's solar arrays that's 5 megawatts. That takes about 30 acres. That is a big project. And from the municipal perspective, that is well beyond the peak capacity of many of our systems. So we have entire utilities where the peak is 1 megawatt. We would be extremely concerned if developers were allowed to propose a 5 megawatt project within one of those territories and require the utility to purchase all of the output. The result would be that we were buying 5 megawatts of power. That utility was buying 5 megawatts of power, only able to utilize 1 megawatt at peak and selling the rest on the market at a loss because of the cost structure. We would be buying it at market price plus adders and selling it at market price. Okay, I think I only have 2 more slides. Where are we now? I think there is, some reason to celebrate success. We're on the way to 100% carbon-free electric supply. We'll have 75% renewable electricity by 2032. Many utilities have taken on more aggressive commitments beyond that. And we've had success in building solar. Solar is now at par with with market prices for electricity when you account for the value of the renewable energy credits. So we would say that the time for additional for subsidies for solar has passed, again, excluding the conversation we had earlier about promoting equity through public dollars. And as I noted, additional cost pressure in the electric sector is undermining state goals. I know the committee's gotten some differing information on the cost benefit of solar in the state, resulting from past policies. I know it's, I know we want to be forward looking as well, but we have, past policies mean we're paying about 50 million a year more for generation than we need to be. And I mentioned that because there's an opportunity cost. Anytime we're spending more than we need to in one area, it means that we don't have those funds to spend, promoting storage or doing other innovative technology choices. And where do we want to be? Again, I'm going to make a pitch for focusing on the other two energy sectors, which account for the vast majority of our carbon emissions, as well as household energy burden. We could be looking at other policies like promoting electric vehicles and heat pumps as well. So again, we just want to make sure that the lens is wide and we're not focusing too specifically on one technology. Again, we made a note about the grid adjuster concept in S119. If utilities are developing projects or contracting with developers for projects, we would be accounting for siting for the benefits or the costs of siting projects in a specific place. As I mentioned, that is not the case with net metering and standard offer, where utilities do not have the ability to negotiate. So those adjuster concepts could be applied to the existing programs that we have in order to minimize the transmission costs for ratepayers. Again, that the Velco long-range transmission plan, I think, has noted that if we continue to deploy solar the way that we have been deploying solar, the transmission system will incur costs up to $500 million. So the price tag is large for updating the grid. And again, it's not to say that that's not warranted, but we need to look at the costs and benefits of that kind of policy. I think I did note VEPSA is looking at managing load and cost effectively managing the output from renewable generation. At this point, we're pursuing storage at the substation, which is where it delivers the most value to the distribution system. We don't yet see the economics of household level storage. In other words, there is utility value from putting storage in people's homes and being able to call on that to mitigate peak. But it also necessitates a significant investment on the homeowner's part. So the utility value in and of itself doesn't justify those investments. These were just concerns about the specific language in S119. Again, just an acknowledgement that any adjuster beyond the value. So I think we've come to pretty much agreement that the value of solar is roughly 9 cents a kilowatt hour. That was actually also reflected in the SYNAPS study that was referenced earlier by Renewable Energy Vermont. That's what their finding was as well. It delivers a benefit to utilities of roughly 9 cents a kilowatt hour. That's also what we're paying for solar when we negotiate with developers. Any adjusters above and beyond that do create cost shifting among customers. I know that S119 called out certain groups of customers that would be eligible for higher compensation, and that may or may not be appropriate, but it's important to acknowledge that it is shifting costs among customers. Those customers that are not in those eligible buckets then have higher costs. There is the concern that generation above tier 2, what is needed for tier 2 compliance, will be sold out of state because tier 2 sets the requirement for utilities and dictates what is needed to remain in Vermont. And to be consistent with least cost planning, utilities will sell the excess renewable energy credits. And again, this is to my point that we have a lot more renewable energy generation in Vermont than what is tier 2 compliant. So for example, some of the old standard offer projects that are not tier 2 compliant, the environmental benefits of those go out of state. And that's because of how the policy is set up currently. And I did make a note about that solar development in Vermont is on the verge of necessitating expensive upgrades to the transmission system. Our understanding is that if we meet tier 2 in a grid sensible way, we can avoid those upgrades. If we go above and beyond tier 2, and again, you should hear from Belco on this, my understanding is it will come with a very high price tag. And last slide, I promise. The recommendations, again, the most attractive part of this conversation to VEPSA is really around getting low-income folks access to renewable energy, rather than mandating set prices for any community energy project. You could simply require utilities to offer community energy programs. We have solar projects in development. We have planned solar projects that customers could easily buy into. Again, and we think it's appropriate to use state funds to subsidize low-income participation. The cost would be similar to what VEC has testified to. They were extremely transparent, and this is the cost that a customer would need to invest in order to essentially cover a $100 a month electric bill. And we would see a pretty similar cost structure. And just because the $9 million had been proposed by the governor, we asked our power supply team to I asked the question of what does this buy us essentially? If we were to devote this all to purchasing shares of renewable energy generators for low income folks, where would that get us? And so that 9 million could pay for between 3 to 6 megawatts of solar capacity, depending on project size and where those projects were located. And that's enough to serve, 1,000 to 2,000 households total electric need. And again, you could decide to not cover the entire need and reach more customers, more households that were in need. So that was just to provide a little bit of context and an illustrative example for the committee. And that concludes my testimony. If there are any additional questions.
As usual, thank you for assembling a lot of great information in a concise manner. And so we have your PowerPoint on our website, or does Jude?
Yes, it's on there.
Okay, great. All right. So I'd encourage committee members to take a look at the PowerPoint to get back to things, and we will be taking this up. I'll reach out to our witnesses we couldn't get to. Again, my apologies. We need to do a hard stop here on this bill and this topic and switch over to Sen Parent, who's offering an amendment on S101 this morning, so that we can hear him before the floor. Thank you, Sen Parent, for coming in. Sorry that we were running a little long, but your former committee was deep in the weeds on a topic of perennial interest. So take us back to the days of Act 250, would you?
Yeah, so well, that's exactly what I'm hoping to do with this amendment. I understand, we might not figure out everything in the next 11 minutes before we get to the floor. But ultimately, my amendment is language that passed the Senate Economic Development Committee last year. It is language that I believe passed this committee, although I omit my recollection of word for word, isn't great. We know there were other pieces, but this seemed to be the area of the downtown exemption where everyone seemed to agree on where we needed to reform Act 250. And my thought process is, as these federal stimulus dollars come available, and we're going to be looking to increase housing at a rapid pace. We heard just yesterday on the floor, we need 5,000 new units in the state a year to keep up with demand. We know it's good policy in Vermont to build in our downtowns in areas where we've already designated for growth, where infrastructure already is. And so in a nutshell, to distill my language down to allow for questions is ultimately just would take the language we worked on last year on removing Act 250 from downtowns, because there's already so much local permitting and other issues in place there, and send that forward with this bill here.
Okay. So I don't, maybe Ms. Chakowski, can you screen share just so that we're all looking at the same thing? We'll just spend, let's do the 3-minute walkthrough. So everyone who, I don't know if people pulled up the calendar, spent some time reading it, but just to refresh everyone's memory of what's in here, that would be helpful. And if you can just sort of give us the maybe 20,000, actually, why don't we ask the sponsor? So you have, and we'll do this together, Tag Team Wrestling. So we have an Act 250 exemption section. Do you want to offer
Yeah,
any
I'm just pulling
notes
it up
on that?
myself. Yeah, so I think, again, just we have the section on Act 250 exemption. The first part of it, section 9, is definitions. Again, this was stuff we looked at last year, no real change. Then we also in section 10, I'm just looking through here real
Do
quick.
you want me to, do you want me to jump in quickly?
Yeah.
So in
Sure.
section 9, it's 2 definitions that are being changed. One is the updating of the definition of mixed income housing, which came out of VHFA's recommendation to sort of shore up their current practice on mixed income. And then also amending the definition of priority housing project because it's tied to areas. So we're striking the references to designated downtowns and neighborhood development areas. And then section 10 amends the exemption section in Act 250 to exempt downtowns and neighborhood development areas. And as Senator Parent pointed out, you did look at this language, and you may recall under this exemption section that existing Act 250 permits in these areas will be extinguished. And in the one of the next sections, the conditions under these existing permits are transferred to the municipal permits. Section 11 repeals 2 sections directly related to downtowns and neighborhood development areas. Currently, neighborhood development areas have a 50% fee reduction under Act 250, so that's struck. And there's also an expedited process under Act 250 for downtown development areas, so that is also repealed. And section 12 is, as I just mentioned, about the municipalities who oversee the municipal permits, giving them authority to transfer the Act 250 permit conditions into the municipal permits. Section 13 adds the executive director of VHCB to the Downtown Development Board, which is the board that makes decisions to designate downtowns and neighborhood development areas. And that works in concert with section 14. Last year, there was concern from the affordable housing community about addressing the potential lack of incentive that would be created by removing Act 250 jurisdiction from these areas because of the definition of priority housing project. So to address those concerns, the VHCB director is added to the board. And then section 14 adds a requirement for an additional affordable housing component in designated downtowns. And I think that's it. So that's the quick version.
Okay. All right. Any committee questions for council or Senator Parent?
So
Senator
since,
Westman.
since I didn't go through any of this last year with it, my question is, if you're transferring to the locals, does this lower any of the requirements if you transfer this to the locals, and does it keep the same standards for people?
I think there it would depend on the locality and what their zoning and bylaws were in development. But again, we're under, the underlying bill we're looking at in S101 is already increasing, is pushing for that increase in density standards in our downtowns. And so I think, I work for a municipality now, and I can tell you our guidelines are pretty tough. A lot of these areas, I don't think, especially in downtowns, like a St. Albans City, they have, their own pieces. And so it's just, where would Act 250 play in? And then it just seems to be a redundant piece here that everyone's agreed increase the cost of creating these housing units in our downtowns.
Thanks.
And there are differences between the Act 250 process and the municipal process. I had started researching that for this committee last year. The appeal process is slightly different, who's eligible for appeal, as well as the initial public notice process is different. And then I would also just like to point out quickly that currently the downtown designation process does not require zoning. There are 20, the neighborhood development areas do require zoning. There are 23 downtowns and 22 of them have zoning. So almost all of them have zoning. But there are some differences between the municipal and Act 250 permit.
Senator McDowell and Senator McCormick.
Two questions. First was just one thing about changing Act 250 and down in these areas going forward. And there's a second question about whether or not the proposal would allow the municipalities to simply erase the existing Act 250 conditions that had been previously established. That's the first question.
I'll look to Alan on that one. I mean, we are
Yeah,
getting
this
the
for
Act
Alan.
250 permit, so.
So this language does extinguish existing Act 250 permits in downtowns and neighborhood development areas and directs the municipality to transfer conditions from that permit that's being extinguished to the municipal permit unless the conditions in Section 12 are met.
So that's Senator Westman has convinced me that dealing with downtowns and infill is one of the best things we can do to deal with the global warming issues. And that would be, to go forward and do that. I'm not ready to extinguish the previous decisions without just on an amendment today, nor was I last year. And is there a section in here that deals with forest blocks, upland, which also deal with global warming issues, or is this just kind of half the package that was being discussed last year?
This is the housing economic development package. And, I'm looking, I think where we got in last year and got this bogged down. I don't think, in all honesty, that a comprehensive Act 250 legislation ever makes it through the process, at least not in the makeup of, with the administration, the legislature we have. So I think we got to take it piece by piece. I mean, the road rule killed the bill last year. And so we get nothing. And then I just think it'd be a shame with these federal dollars coming in to try to increase affordable housing, not to try to make these adjustments here. We're going to not spend those dollars as efficiently as possible.
Oh, I'm not disagreeing with the senator's position, but last year the forest block thing did not have the rule in it, and so that passed, that section passed. But so,
Right. So I'm just looking at the clock. It's literally 11:30, so I know we're all going to need to take off in a moment. Let me just pause and say, from my point of view, you're reminding us of a large, controversial, and not entirely settled area. We're agreeing with the notion of supporting infill and smart growth and development. but in terms of, we need a committee position relative to this amendment prior to the floor. And so I would ask, I guess by a show of hands, who is ready to support this amendment as drafted and offered support? And sorry, Senator McCormick, we didn't get to your question, but I think to cut to the chase, for the floor, we need to know where people stand as a committee member. So is anyone ready to support this amendment?
I'm inclined to. I would rather, yeah, I'm inclined to.
Okay. So in terms of a committee position on it, should I report Senator Campion? I'll have to check out. He has a bill up, so he punched out immediately. I'll check with him on the floor. Should I be reporting our current position as 3-1-0? Senator McCormick?
Yeah, just very briefly, I want, it should come as no surprise that I oppose this. But I do want to apologize to Senator Parent that I'm voting to oppose it without having had an awful lot of discussion. And I acknowledge that. I would like to have given him the courtesy of a discussion, but I see no reason to change my position from last year on this.
Senator McDowell?
Mr. Chair, I don't oppose the notion of Act 250 going forward in downtowns. And this bill has not carved itself out to meet that. So I would say I oppose the bill in this form at this time. And I'm open to working with Senator Westman to meet the goals that we agree on downtown, and this is not the time to do it on a floor amendment at the last minute. So I'm not.
Well, I understand, and just to speak quickly, I didn't expect. I don't presume this passes, but we had a lot of momentum on this last year, and my full piece on this is to try to re-engage the legislature and make sure we take this issue up in the coming weeks and months. As we have this, once in a generational opportunity, or at least once a decade or two opportunity of federal investment. And I think, we do a good job. And I'll probably end my comment with, I just read a book called Strong Towns. And it really takes a look at how we've done development over the last 50 years and may have been doing it wrong. And we need to look at the value of small lots and downtowns and how it means so much more to our own grand lists and financial well-being of our communities. So
agreed. And this is today at this time is not the time to leap into the water.
Well,
Okay.
I would just say I do have some reluctance over this. I just don't want it to go down with no support because I want to see the discussion continue.
Right. Okay.
I'd
Great.
like to
And I'll check
continue.
with. All right. So thank you everyone for hanging in there. We are adjourned.